Hey everyone, how's it going? So what we're going to do now is move on to the registration system of our site. Obviously, most of the functionality on our site revolves around the users being signed in, so it makes sense for us to tackle this part first. So what we're going to do is the very first step is we're going to check if the user's already logged in when they try to access the home page. Because if you look at app.js, in our current implementation, we've said that when the user accesses the root of our site, which is what this means, go to the home page. Now, we don't want to go to the home page if they're not signed in. We want to instead forward the user to the sign-in page. So all we're going to do is essentially add a check before we do this part, which sees if they're logged in. If they're not logged in, it will send them to the registration page or the sign-in page. If they are logged in, it will just carry on and execute this part as normal, and they'll be taken to the home page. So we actually don't need to write any code inside this block right here. We're actually going to add something in between called a middleware. So we're going to basically pass it a little bit of code which will execute before it does this part. So you can think of middleware as a kind of separate step along the request response path. So before it executes this part, which gives the user the response, it will do the middleware, which essentially is a step that comes first. So it's actually quite straightforward. What we're going to do is create a new file now. So go to the root of our site and let's create a new file. So this is in the root of our site, not in any folder. So middleware.js. All right, there it is in the root of our site. So there's not actually going to be a whole lot that goes into this file. All we're going to do is say export dot, and I'll explain this in a second. Don't worry. Require login. And then we'll say equals, and then in parentheses we'll do the rec, which is the request, the response objects, so res, and then next. This should look familiar to you because it's exactly the same as what we have here, this rec, res, and next function block. And then inside there we'll do our check. So it's just a quick if-else block. So what I'll do is write this out first, and then I'll explain it afterwards. So just bear with me for a second. So we'll say if rec dot session and rec dot session dot user. We'll just return next like this, and like I said, I will explain it in just a second, so bear with. And then all we're going to do is one more line. We'll just say return res dot redirect like this, and then we can say slash login like that. Okay, so what have we just done? So what we've done is we've declared this middleware.js file as having a require login function. So when we call require login, it'll essentially do this. Now this function takes the rec, res, and next objects as parameters, just like this function here does. And then all we're doing is checking if the session property is set on the request. And if it is set, so if we do have the session property, we check if the user property is also set. So we check the session one because essentially if they're not using sessions, this wouldn't even be here. And then once we know they have the session variable set, we just want to make sure that the user property is also set. So if the user property exists, it means that they are logged in, because we will only set this when the user logs in successfully. If this doesn't exist, we know they haven't logged in yet, so we just go ahead and redirect them to the login route, which we haven't created yet, but we'll do that shortly. So this right here, this next, basically passes it on to the next step in the request response cycle. So next is this right here, this function, and it basically means carry on and do the next step in the cycle. Because remember, this is middleware, so this is coming between, or I should say before we do this part. So when we call next from here, it will just basically carry on, and it will be forwarded to this function right here. So when we call next, obviously we know they're logged in, so it goes to here, and then we'll just go ahead and render the home page. So there's one more thing we need to do, and that's to actually use this middleware function we created here. So before we can do that, we need to go to the top here and declare a const, so const middleware equals require. Inside there we'll just put dot slash, meaning look in the directory you're currently in, and then middleware. And that should be it. We're ready to use that now. So just take this middleware object right here, And let's just go down to the request part right here, this get handler. And then all we're going to do is stick middleware dot require login, which is our function we just created, in between those two. So this is basically saying when the root of our site is accessed, first execute this step here, which is our require login one, and then afterwards it will do this. So this is the next step in the cycle. So let's give that a try. Now we are going to see an error because we don't have a login route, but that's okay. We'll know if it gets to that point or not. So I'm going to start this up, and then I'll go back to here. I'll refresh the page, and yeah, because we're seeing cannot get login, we know that it got redirected to the login page right here. So we know it executed this successfully. Obviously, if we did have the login route, then you would see the login page, but for now, we know at least it's hitting this part. So as soon as we create this, it will be good. The main thing is we want to check that it didn't get to here and that we aren't seeing the home page because, like I said, we're not logged in.